Really pleased to welcome you to our quarterly update looking at the latest findings from the Robert Half Jobs Confidence Index, which is in partnership with Cebr, the Centre of Economics and Business Research. So today we have Chris Breen, who is the Head of Economic Insights at Cebr, who will be going through the latest JCI data, followed by a short Q&A on the back of the findings. So before I start, I would just like to share some of the reasons why Robert Half have commissioned this unique study. So whilst business and consumer confidence are regularly measured, analysing worker confidence throughout macroeconomic lens, and the context of the job creation, both security and career progression can reveal deep insights into the state and stability of the labour market. Also, it's great to keep a finger on the pulse of current trends. Employers can create more purposeful T&A and L&D strategies, whilst job seekers and employers can make better informed decisions on their goals or even their remuneration. Also, work model flexibility is coming into it, as well as skills and progression, and how all of these fit into the wider picture. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Chris Breen from Cebr. As Head of Economic Insights at Cebr, Chris is regularly interviewed on TV and the radio. He also often presents his research at public events around the UK, analyses and authors bespoke reports, and also as this comments on labour market trends. So we are delighted that Cebr has worked with Robert Half on the Jobs Confidence Index in the past year. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Chris.
Yes, thank you very much, Gareth. You're right that the Robert Half Jobs Confidence Index, it goes beyond official data by providing a holistic view of the labour market, particularly by focusing on the experiences of workers and candidates. It makes it quite a unique index, and one that, as we will find out with this quarter's JCI in particular, it paints a bit of a different and more nuanced story than official data alone. Nonetheless, coming out shortly after the official data that forms part of it. So yes, very interesting index. So what does it reveal this time around? Well, I'll just quickly share my screen. Wonders of technology, just takes a moment. There we go. So the Jobs Confidence Index increased to 46 in Q1 2024. This is the 14th consecutive quarter in which it has been in positive territory. It was also up by 7 points from the previous quarter's reading of 40. This uptick follows 2 consecutive quarters of decline on the index, but nonetheless, it continues to remain well above the long-run average. This indicates strong job confidence above the normal level. There are 4 constituent pillars, and out of those, 3 of them stood in positive territory in Q1 2024, and 3 pillars recorded higher readings than the previous quarter. Only the pay confidence pillar recorded a lower score. Of the 4 pillars, search and progression confidence experienced the strongest gain. This was up by 21 points on the quarter, moving it firmly into positive territory. Job security confidence also saw a quarterly gain in its readings. This represents the pillar's highest reading on record, with the index starting at the start of 2009. It has also recorded the strongest reading of the JCI's 4 pillars for 10 consecutive quarters. The macroeconomic confidence pillar improved for the 2nd consecutive quarter. This aligns with the overall picture of the UK economy moving out of recession, with expectations for a gradual recovery in growth over this year and next year. And the pay confidence pillar fell this quarter, its first quarterly fall since 2003 Q1. Coincidentally, this pillar is now in negative territory, indicating that pay confidence is below the long-run average. So now we'll dig into the pillars in a bit more detail, starting with the job security confidence pillar. This rose to its highest level on record, which again, the index started in Q1 2009. And this improvement came despite a rise in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate stood at 4.3% in Q1 2024, sorry. This marks a rise of 0.3 percentage points compared to Q4 2023. However, this is still a very low rate by historical standards. Meanwhile, the number of vacancies per unemployed individual also fell in Q1, which impacted the pillar score negatively, although again, it remains above pre-pandemic levels. However, these negative changes in the pillar were more than offset by an increase in workers' confidence in their job security. So 60% of employees said that they feel confident about their job looking ahead to the next 6 months. This is the highest level since Q1 last year, after falling for 3 consecutive quarters. Meanwhile, levels of temporary work fell for a second consecutive quarter to an index record low. Looking at pay confidence, real earnings grew for a 4th consecutive quarter in Q1. Annual growth in pay rose to 1.7% when accounting for inflation, up from 1.4% last quarter. Overall, nominal pay increases continued to ease slightly, but this was more than offset by a faster fall in the rate of inflation. However, a sharp worsening of jobs earning security meant that despite this improvement in real wages, the pay confidence pillar fell for a 3rd consecutive quarter. And earning security here is measured by the percentage of workers who haven't been paid a regular amount in the past month. And labour productivity fell by 0.3% on an annual basis in Q1, following 0.5% growth in the previous quarter. Labour productivity is particularly important because over the long term, it is the main driver of long-term growth in real wages and in people's standard of living. Moving on, the job search and progression confidence pillar experienced the strongest quarterly gain among the major JCI constituents. The pillar now sits firmly in positive territory, indicating that job search and progression confidence is above the long-term average level. The core driver of this rise was an improvement in career progression confidence measured through a survey of workers. A fall in involuntary part-time work also contributed positively to the pillar. This is now at its lowest level since the JCI began in 2009. Meanwhile, levels of economic inactivity remained largely unchanged on the quarter. Macroeconomic confidence improved in Q1 as the UK economy returned to growth and moved out of the recessionary period experienced in the second half of 2023. You can see that our index, this pillar is made up of both consumer confidence and business confidence. And this general improvement is in line with the CBR's view that the UK economic outlook has improved since last year, which we'll touch upon a bit more later. The relatively low pillar score, however, compared with the period directly after the pandemic, is in line with the ongoing weakness that we see in the economy and the expected low growth rate for this year. We also had a hot topic this month, this quarter, which was looking at employee pay expectations, which we measured through a survey of UK workers. So overall, UK workers anticipate a pay increase of 3.8% from their current employer over the next 12 months. This is 1.9 percentage points lower than the growth in total pay they experienced over the previous year on average. The results suggest that UK workers are expecting lower pay increases than they have experienced. And also, if you compare our survey results to the Bank of England's decision maker panel, which is a survey of CFOs from small, medium and large UK businesses, we find that employee pay growth expectations are more subdued than employers' pay growth expectations, which you can see employers expect to pay on average 4.7% compared to 3.8% expected from employees. However, if we admit those who don't expect any pay rise, the average expected increase from employees rises to 5.1%. And it's worthwhile noting that 21% of respondents, so over 1 in every 5, expect a pay rise above the employer's average expected pay. So it's quite a nuanced picture. But even if we take the lower growth rate of 3.8%, that will continue to concern the Bank of England, who may not see that rate of wage growth as consistent with CPI inflation target rate of 2%. We then asked employees what the 3 most likely outcomes, or up to the 3 most likely outcomes, are for them if they don't receive the pay rise that they expect over the next 12 months. Only a quarter would likely take no action at all, while approximately 1 in 5 would consider changing employers to find a better paying role. Other actions that may be taken include reducing spending on non-essentials, which was selected by 17% of respondents, which indicates that while the effects of the cost of living crisis have begun to ease, many are still feeling the impacts acutely. It's also interesting that younger employees, so those aged 18 to 34, are significantly more likely to consider changing roles at their current employer to achieve higher pay, with 17% selecting that option, compared with those aged 35 to 54, for whom only 10% selected that option, or over 55s, who only 4% selected that option. And interestingly, for those who expect a pay rise of 5% or more, only 16% would take no action, and 24% would look to move on if they didn't get their expected pay rise. This indicates that those who have higher pay expectations are more likely to take action if they don't receive their expected pay rise. So looking ahead, Cebr expects the economy to grow by 1% in 2024 on an annual basis. This might seem quite low, given that we had a 0.6% growth rate in Q1 alone, but that growth rate masks weakness in consumer prospects, with changes in imports and exports actually creating a lot of that growth. In fact, looking at household spending, that rose by a more muted 0.2%. And although this 1% figure is relatively weak by historical standards, it's worth noting that it does represent a significant acceleration relative to the rather meagre 0.1% that we saw in 2023. The recovery that we see this year and next will be supported by the ongoing recovery in real wages that we've just discussed, and easing inflation, which will eventually allow the bank to begin cutting interest rates. We then expect growth to pick up again next year to roughly around 1.7%. So overall, the JCI points to increased job security confidence despite increasing unemployment due to the improved wider outlook. We also see lower pay confidence despite increasing real wages due to lower pay security and productivity. This again really highlights the power of a holistic measure of job confidence that this index provides. Less surprisingly is the fact that job search security and macroeconomic confidence have improved. So that's it, Gareth. I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic, Chris. That was very informative. So yeah, I've taken down some notes myself there that are really prevalent, especially in the market that we are seeing. So a couple of questions for you. So looking at the results, in what ways do you think that this continues to be a unique economic and labour market cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's clearly, I would say, a changing relationship between growth and the labour market. So usually, you know, as I and other economists got taught at school and university, you'd expect that unemployment rises when demand is low, and vice versa. And that's quite a key relationship for how the economy works overall. However, we've just come out of a recession, and before that, we've had, over a decade of quite meager growth rates. But despite that, unemployment, although it's ticked up a little bit in recent months, it remains very, very low. And it seems as though generally what's causing this is what economists would call labour hoarding. Essentially, that means that although overall demand at the business may decline, rather than getting rid of workers, businesses may wish to hold on to those workers for when things improve. This isn't actually a new phenomenon. There's actually plenty of evidence that of increased labour hoarding during the financial crisis and pretty much every recessionary period since. Although obviously the furlough scheme during the COVID recession means that that was a slightly different example. But nonetheless, it seems as though labour hoarding is having a big impact. And the reasons that businesses might be doing this are pretty easy to figure out. If you're not able to find all of the staff that you need when times are good, you're going to be more reluctant to let them go when times are bad. And indeed, I'm sure you're hearing the same as what we hear, that there's increased cost and time associated with hiring the right staff for roles. And this makes the relative cost of holding on to them when during a downtime lower. And we expect this trend to continue. Both major political parties are promising to decrease immigration levels. The population continues to get older. There's a falling birth rate. So the long-term demographic changes that we expect to see means that over time, labour supply will continue to get tighter and tighter. So this trend is only likely to continue.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And labour hoarding is a term that goes around in cycles, isn't it? We don't hear it for a while, and then all of a sudden it raises its head again. But we are actually seeing that in some of our clients, and some of the clients are reskilling and redeploying people in other areas of the business whilst they wait for what they would deem a certain bounce back. So yeah, very informative. Another question: what are the reasons for a high jobs confidence index amidst such economic uncertainty?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, it's worth noting that, as you saw, workers are actually more optimistic on the economy than businesses. So this tends to be true actually for most of the previous decade or since we started the index. And while we have a period of economic uncertainty, we do expect some improvement over this year and next. But the idea of labour shortages are bad for business. Right? They're bad for business. They're bad for the economy. Businesses can't produce as much as they'd like to produce because they don't have the staff. But while they're bad for businesses, they're good for the individual workers because, individual workers are less likely to be made redundant. And indeed, I think redundancies look as though they're still very low. And these workers can continue to negotiate higher wages, either within their current role or by changing roles. So, the overall picture for workers is high wage growth, low unemployment and lower inflation. They have every reason to be quite confident right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I picked out from your earlier presentation was that one in five expect a bigger pay rise than employers are actually giving. So I suppose when we've got candidates in negotiating pay rises with their employers, then they're certainly going in it in the first instance from a place of confidence. So off the back of that, Chris, what would your opinion be, I suppose, on candidates? Are they still in the driving seat?
Yeah, I think they are. So we don't expect unemployment to rise much further than where it currently is. And again, while vacancies have eased markedly, it remains well above pre-pandemic levels. So pretty much any indicator that you can look at for labour market tightness, it will be flashing red right now. So this puts candidates in a very strong position to find new roles, which often achieve higher pay rises than staying with your current employer, or again, to negotiate higher pay rises within your current role.
Yeah, again, and again, I think from what we said earlier with regards to confidence in candidates finding new roles, yet 3/4 would take no further action should they not be happy with a pay rise. So it's certainly a very interesting time for both candidates and employers with with regards to confidence around the current economic climate. So with wage growth, that is currently still above inflation. What is CBR's prediction going forward, and the likelihood of actual further wage growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's worth noting that currently CPI, so price inflation, is now at 2.3%. It might rise slightly in the coming months, or at least stay where it is, before gradually easing back down to target over the coming 18 to 24 months. Looking at wage inflation in particular, we expect that the next set of data will show an increase, given April's national minimum wage increase, which was quite large. This will also likely put pressure on wages further up the income scale over the coming months, which we've seen previously when national minimum wage has increased by as much as it has in this time.
Yeah.
And then the wage growth should then begin to ease again in sort of the medium term. We expect a rate of wage growth of around 3.6% by this time next year. So it's actually relatively in line with what we got from employees. Overall, looking at wage inflation versus price inflation, we expect that real wages will remain positive and robust for the foreseeable future, which is obviously good for households.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from the difference between a permanent employee versus maybe an interim employee, with still the skills gaps and low unemployment rates, then that is clearly still driving the kind of wages within those, especially from a senior interim perspective, that is still on the rise. So, okay. Next question. Why do you think employee pay growth, one of the comments you just made, around pay growth expectations lower than employers, why do you think employee pay growth expectations are lower than employers?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question. I think there are a number of factors that will go into employers' pay award decisions. So actually, survey data from the Bank of England last year asked that question to businesses: what are driving your decisions on pay increases? And actually, the top thing at that point was the rate of CPI inflation. So businesses were trying to maintain the standard of living for their employees as much as they possibly could. Other main drivers were wage changes seen across the rest of the market, so trying to remain competitive, and similarly their ability to try and recruit and retain staff. So obviously, looking ahead, CPI inflation is now much lower and probably be less of an impact. But those other two drivers, competition for staff in your market and trying to recruit and retain the staff that you have, they will continue to be key factors. It's important to remember, again, going back to the mean average expectations from workers is lower than the mean for employers, but there's likely to be a lot of variation within that, both from business side and from the employee side. So businesses are going to have to judge, and it's probably going to be quite a fine judgment, what level of pay increase they award to balance the risk of attrition against the cost of those pay rises. And again, given that replacing staff can be very costly. It's also the case that, although, we're looking at expectations, it's a snapshot of expectations. We don't know how those will develop over time. And it may be that although you have an expectation for pay growth in your head at this current moment, and you may not proactively look to leave if you don't get that pay increase, if you notice that your competitors are paying more for the same role, you may decide, to pursue those opportunities anyway. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how the differences in these expectations plays out over the coming year.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And in, in a lot of cases, the the cost of hire to a to a business is significant in regards to the cost of a pay rise. So, clients are working through that and trying to balance the books accordingly. So, follow-up question really, how much is this good news for the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee?
I don't think it's great news. Again, it depends on how these expectations change over time. But I think not only here, but across the US, the EU, and elsewhere, wage growth has been more sticky than had been anticipated by central banks. And at the current level of wage growth, even if we look at that 3.8% figure, the lowest kind of figure out of the survey figures that we have, that probably doesn't correlate with 2% price inflation. Wage inflation, obviously, as a mostly a services economy that we are, wage inflation is quite a big driver of overall price inflation, given that it feeds through to prices of services. So the bank will be taking a very close look at wage growth over the next couple of months and hoping that we do see more of an easing than we have seen. And they will, that's why we expect that interest rates will maybe start to fall in the next couple of months, but will fall at quite a slow rate because they will be keeping an eye on the data and acting accordingly to what they see.
Yeah, and when we talk about candidates and candidates' motivation, do you think that at the moment, candidates are more motivated by job security during the economic uncertainty?
Yeah, so that is usually what we would see when we have periods of economic uncertainty or, just coming out of a recession. You'd normally see that job moves decline. But, again, job confidence is very strong, unemployment is low. And just as I mentioned that the relationship between uncertainty and the labour market seems to be changing, it's probably the case that the relationship between job moves and economic uncertainty will change too. Again, only 26% of people are unlikely to take any action should they not get the pay rise that they want in the next 12 months. And up to 1 in 5 may look to change employer. It's also worth noting, actually, that confidence, so the household confidence index that forms a part of the JCI, there's a specific component looking at household finances, and confidence in household finances, although they've improved recently, they remain well below average. And we look at discretionary incomes for those on the lowest incomes. And currently, it looks as though those remain too low to cover a usual basket of bills and non-discretionary income. So many households continue to struggle, and therefore those households in particular, those workers in particular, will likely to see wage increases as more important compared to if their standard of living was higher.
Yeah. Okay. And one more question, if I can. Do you know what? I could probably ask another 20 questions, Chris. It's very interesting, especially at the moment. But one more question, and I am going to put you on the spot a bit with a political question. But what are the emerging divide lines between the parties on job policies?
Yes, that's a big question, and obviously, we are already only a month away from the election, so I'm sure that all of these policies will come into focus increasingly over the next few weeks. But I must say it's very hard right now to talk about the exact differences, as we only have a snapshot of what their currently set of policies will be, and we'll be eagerly awaiting the manifestos, which will come out at some point in the next couple of weeks, to really be able to answer that question properly. However, Labour have pledged what they're calling a New Deal for working people. There are a number of different changes in there, but I think one of the key ones is that they will increase the Low Pay Commission's remit to be able to take the cost of living into account when deciding the minimum wage. That could lead to further wage increases in the sort of medium to long term compared to what their current remit looks like. It's quite hard to judge exactly what the impact will be right now until we see the exact details of how that remit will be changed and how they will take the cost of living into account. But certainly that will be something to keep an eye on. I think more broadly, both major parties are likely to have pledges related to childcare when they release their manifestos. That's likely to be, quite a vote winner for either party, given the importance of the issue to young families and the huge cost of childcare. But it's also quite key for the labour market to continue to support parents, particularly from young families, back into work full time. So definitely worth keeping an eye on that. I think the final thing I'd say is, in the long term, the best way that either party can support jobs and wage growth is, again, by improving growth and productivity. But unfortunately, there's very little fiscal headroom for either government to play with. So both parties are going to be quite creative, looking for low-cost policies that can boost skills, boost innovation in order to achieve this. And it's quite interesting. It already seems to be that both major parties are focusing on being pro-growth with their policies. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the manifestos on that.
Super. Chris, really appreciate you answering that, and look, again, another fantastic presentation, very, very informative. So unfortunately, that is all we have time for this quarter. Please take a look at the report, which you can find on our Robert Half website. If anybody wants to discuss the findings, then please get in touch. There will be another webinar in a quarter's time when the indicators almost certainly will have changed. So Chris, thank you very, very much. Also, the team at CBR, we do genuinely value your partnership, and we look forward to our next quarterly catch-up.